All right, welcome back to episode 10 of the Dreamers podcast. We're already at episode 10, and as always, we're bringing you guys stories of individuals who are inspiring the future generation, having amazing stories to tell. I'm Munir Rahman.
And I'm Asfan Musa, and today we're joined by Dr. Giulio Draetta, who is an accomplished physician scientist and cancer research. He currently serves as the Senior Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, where he helps guide major scientific and clinical efforts to improve cancer care. Dr. Draetta also directs the Division of Cancer Medicine and holds the Sewell Family Distinguished University Chair in Genomic Medicine.
Now, he has connected discoveries in cell cycle regulation and genomic vulnerabilities with real clinical innovation. He's helped turn scientific breakthroughs into effective cancer therapies and push the field of precision oncology forward. Dr. Draetta, welcome to the Dreamers podcast.
Welcome.
Thanks very much. It's so great to be with you today.
No, of course. And then we can kind of go straight into it. I want to talk about your origins, especially. I read online that you worked at a milk production plant when you were very young doing quality control. Is that correct?
I don't know how you found about that. That's true. It's true. Well, as I was a medical student, actually, trying to find ways of supporting myself, particularly during the summer times, I would work at quality control in the milk production.
And in that time,
plant.
would you ever think you'd have such a prestigious position here at MD Anderson during that time?
But I think, the one thing that really made me excited about was doing is the pleasure of doing it, as opposed to thinking about a career path at particularly those early times. I really was fascinated by science. I was fascinated by the idea of working in a medical environment, possibly becoming a doctor. And this occurred also considering that no one in my family had that kind of background. I was the first one in the family to go to college and so on. So it was, for me, it was really about an experiment in itself versus, planning for a career at that time.
And what does your family think about you trying to go to med school and starting that whole career in medicine?
They were really excited. And I would say definitely, they were super excited about the idea that I would become a doctor. They were less understanding the research path of it because it wasn't really something that, a family would anticipate. Particularly at those times in old Europe, you would think of a son or a daughter going to school, becoming a lawyer, a pharmacist, a doctor, this much more standardized professions versus, a researcher or even an artist, God forbid, in their opinion.
Yeah.
Especially because you were the first one, so they didn't have any picture of what it would look like. So, and I feel like I can kind of relate with it because same thing with my family, first generation student, going into university, including Munib up here. And yeah, sometimes they don't have a clue what we're doing, but they are definitely proud of me and they want me to pursue the best education out there. So I'm thankful for them too. Yeah.
And kind of based off of that, you went to the University of Naples medical school. And did you ever think transitioning from Italy, medical sciences to the US, did you have a lot of problems at all?
Not at all. I was, sometimes it's really the people you meet. And so in my second year of medical school, I took a biochemistry exam, and this professor was really, impressed by the way I presented at the exam. So back then we had both, a written as well as an oral exam, and he said, why don't you come to my lab? And he's a cardiologist, and was really very inspired by his own experience in the United States. Yeah, he happened to go to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, in the very early 70s, and he was really impressed, and he did extremely well, worked with some Nobel Prize winners back then. And he said, Giulio, you got to go there. This is where research is happening. If you want to do both clinical work as well as research, you should really go to the United States. That proved not to be particularly easy. I applied to 70 or so places before anyone would answer my query. But, it was really incredible as an opportunity. And, one thing I want to reflect upon is the fact that very often, young, college students, medical students think how difficult the path may be. Well, back then, everybody was telling us that, there were too many doctors around, they would never find a job. So it wasn't really an environment where everybody said, oh my God, you're in medical school, you're going to be super successful. There are always those negative points that come forward that make you think, oh my God, did I really make the right choice at that point?
Of course. I feel like it's always like, it's going into the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen, but I'm glad that you trusted the process. And kind of talking about the MD and PhD route, did you face any certain challenges with that specifically?
Not necessarily, because I did my MD first and then my PhD.
Okay.
And when I came to America, I realized that despite the fact I had been familiar with some laboratory work, this wasn't sufficient to really bring me to a different level. I went in a hardcore protein biochemistry laboratory. And I learned a lot, but I also learned about the importance of getting, further qualification for the work I was going to do.
How long was the journey of like MD, PhD both combined?
Well, so in Europe, the MD is 6 years because but you go straight out of high school because you do your first 2 years are propedeutic to the next step. So you're gonna do all of your basic disciplines, chemistry, biochemistry, physics, math, osteoarthropology and all those kind of things. And then you start the medical school prep, and then you have 5 years of specialty.
Okay.
Okay. And then PhD is on top of that?
No, that would be
combined
that would be combined.
All right, perfect. Let's move on to the next segment.
Great. Now I want to bring up your academic and research foundations. So earlier in your career, you focused on fundamental cell cycle mechanisms at a time, and when the field looked very different than it does now. So what gave you the confidence to invest so deeply in those questions before the rest of the world fully appreciated the importance?
Well, it really started because the work at NIH was really focusing on structure function of proteins and protein-protein interactions. This was at the time when the recombinant DNA technology was just starting. So a lot of the work was about actual purification of proteins. In my case, I was working in extracting proteins from bovine brains. So you start with like large quantities of these brains that you would go to the place to get and then process, and purifying those proteins, understanding those relationships by after purification, cutting the proteins into pieces, understanding binding domains, and so on and so forth. And all of that was therefore very
Initial thought.
and very specific in certain areas. I had the opportunity to apply to a laboratory that was investing in genetics. And this was at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in Long Island. And specifically, they were looking for biochemists that would help work together with geneticists into identifying some new gene functions in yeast that related to the cell division cycle. So this to me was a way of expanding my experience. At that point, I wasn't necessarily linked to any specific disease context, but I thought this was going to be a great opportunity to study processes. And then while at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, I happened to discover that the same mechanisms that we were studying in yeast were functional in human cells. And so that pivoted my entire career towards understanding cell divisions. And it's easy to think that if you're working on how cells divide, very soon you're going to hit diseases in which proliferation or cell proliferation is a determinant. And that's where cancer came about.
Amazing. Love that journey. And you trained across multiple fields like pathology, biochemistry, molecular biology, and they each serve a very important function on how they tend to look at cancer. Do you think that range of training shaped the way you looked at problems in cancer research? Did that help you in some way studying all these different fields together?
I think so. You want to get an appreciation. I have to say, well, of course, I have tremendous respect for professional PhDs because they can go very deep around specific knowledge. I think the medical background gives you that perspective, sometimes naive perspective. that really makes you think at organismal problems, and not necessarily solely about the lump that grows in your body, but the impact of that growth on the overall homeostasis of the organism. And so I think the medical background definitely helps in that case. And I would mention this anecdote in a way. The great times at the intramural campus at NIH, the National Institutes of Health, really came about as a result of the fact that many MDs, to avoid going into combat in Vietnam, decided to be civil servants at the NIH. And many MDs joined NIH at that time in the laboratories. And they were tremendously successful. These people involved, the people that identified the first oncogenes, the people that identified the AIDS virus, and many other discoveries. So I think an infusion of, and if you want, at the end, thinking more about physician scientists and continue to encourage the recruitment of physician scientists into academic environments this is something of incredible importance for the future, and protected time for physicians so that they can conduct research activities is going to be very important for our ability to compete in the real world and continue to drive impact.
That's amazing. And would you say, is it important to have both MD, PhD to also get into research and still keep doing the clinical side? Or could you be an MD and still be involved in some sort of research?
I mean, clearly, ideally, you will want to keep some level of clinical activity because it would keep you connected with the patient, with the clinical problem. In my case, there was a strong disassociation because I was primarily working as an ICU anesthesiologist and then doing laboratory research. And the two things, for me at least, were not totally compatible. But if you are a lung cancer researcher and you're also a medical oncologist seeing lung cancer patients, that's totally doable, in my opinion, or a stem cell transplanter and running a lab.
That's amazing. And now I want to bring up your time when you co-leaded the MD Anderson's Moonshots program. And back in 2013, you started as a co-leader. It is a collaborative effort to accelerate the development of scientific discoveries into clinical advances that save patients' life. So what did leading Moonshots program teach you about the kinds of systems and structures a cancer center like MD Anderson really needs for breakthroughs to reach patients in the bedside?
So there are, thank you for this question. This is really been a passion of mine because what we often realize is that philanthropy is an essential component of what we do because it supports research that often is not as structured as the research that is linked to grant applications, where usually to get funding you have to have plenty of preliminary data and be very much mainstream with the research. But what if you really want to explore something that it's yet to be found, And so this is going to be very important in the case of this Moonshot program, because the way we structured this was that really didn't need a lot of preliminary data. As long as you had a bold idea, you had developed that idea in collaboration with other colleagues in a multidisciplinary team, and you had a view of a short, medium-term impact on the disease, on any disease that you chose to work on. So what we were able to do is basically aggregate these sources of funding and then evaluate proposals in each of the areas. We had defined 12, then became 13 disease types, and you can ask and apply for that. And so part of this is that really we're looking at a peer-reviewed system with an external advisory board made out of top scientists and clinicians in the field to be able to then allocate funding. But the other part of that was that this was structured as a program with a contract, so that basically not all of the money would be given up front, but that money would be allocated over time based on an evaluation. Yeah. So will you deliver on the promise? Of course, when we think about research, we don't assume that everything is going to work out.
Yeah.
Right.
But what we wanted to see was effort. So if you said you were going to do that within that time frame, we will be looking at whether or not there will be impact.
Okay.
If there is impact as a result of that, even if it was a negative impact in a way, you would have put that effort in, and we would be able to discuss whether there will be alternative pathways. But what we wouldn't want to have is that the money would be derailed toward things that were not relevant to the program. And that was really fantastic. And, myself and my colleague Andy Futrial managed the program for a number of years.
I feel like that process is really well. It's like rather than giving all the funding straight up front, you're kind of giving it a process of evaluation of see how the process goes, which is actually really good for clinical research itself. Yeah.
Correct.
All right, Dr. Draetta, I want to talk about your role in leading translational initiatives at MD Anderson. How have you helped move discoveries from the lab into actual patient treatments?
I think, in my own research, but I think generally you want to really focus on critical vulnerabilities and try to discover mechanisms that are going to be impactful on survival of cancer cells and with evidence of unique dependencies as opposed to things that are easily bypassed by other mechanisms of adaptation or upfront resistance. So I think you can do that, and then you can do that by, again, expanding this concept of collaborative efforts, because you can't do everything on your own. Yeah. So in my case specifically, we always looked for people that might be experienced in the discovery and development of small molecule inhibitors. When I say small molecules, I mean molecules, the size of aspirin, more or less. And or biologics, monoclonal antibodies, cell therapies. And I think what's been really special about MD Anderson is that we have that internal capability that, of course, complements what goes on in the pharmaceutical industry, but is not necessarily tied to commercial considerations like they might have had in the pharma environment, and where ultimately, if they have to develop a drug, they have to think about what the market size for that drug is going to be and whether or not they will be able to recover on the investment. Nothing wrong with that. But the question is, if you're focusing on a disease that doesn't have as many patients affected, should you just give up on that? And that's what we didn't want to do here.
Yeah. And also, as your role as Chief Scientific Officer and Senior Vice President, especially at MD Anderson, how have you kind of seen the precision oncology move forward throughout the years?
Well, many years ago, we really had no idea of the complexity. And so when you were thinking about developing a drug, you were going for lung cancer or pancreatic or others without any knowledge that there might be, molecular lesions that would actually segment all of those patients. Yeah. When we first developed an EGFR inhibitor for lung cancer, our commercial colleagues, this was when I was in pharma, were assuming that, with that drug, we were going to treat every single lung cancer patient. But, now we know very clearly that the EGFR inhibitors are only effective in patients that carry that EGFR mutation. Yeah. And then, the second and the third and the fourth generation EGFR inhibitor are specifically targeted at resistance mutations. So you have to really change completely the approach. Yeah.
And I feel like cancer in general is very diverse. It's very different. So I feel like that's why it's so hard to battle. Is could be different for each person. You don't know. Yeah. And I guess kind of talking about that, I want to talk about your work across academia, biotech startups, big pharma, and now leading MD Anderson. From that journey, what have you learned about the collaboration between clinicians, industry partners, and scientists? How important do you think that is between the collaboration for them?
Yeah. So the great advantage of working in a pharma organization is that you're working as a member of a team, and that's structured from the beginning as such. So you have all of these units collaborating, from people that do the biology, people that do the pharmacology, people that do the medicinal chemistry, and so on. So that is the beauty. Really, it's teamwork from the start. Whether it's a startup company or a large pharma, that's really wonderful. The one thing that's really missing is the daily interaction with the clinical environment. So very often, whenever I talk even to small or even larger companies, they bring me a problem, and you feel like they've gone all the way to the discovery of a new molecules without giving a lot of thought about what the clinical use is going to be. I mean, it's easy to say, okay, there is a mutation in lung cancer, we're going to go after a compound that blocks that. But then, have you ever had a conversation with an expert in lung cancer or many experts or our entire community to talk about, okay, how are you going to position that drug in which patient, at what time would that mutation develop during the journey of that patient, what else would that patient be treated with at the same time, and is this drug going to be compatible with the standard of care that we use today, immunotherapy, cell therapy, and so on and so forth. So I think the advantage, just to summarize, in a company environment, you really can be very efficient because you have these multidisciplinary teams working together and so on. But you are missing on the opportunity that we have in a place like this, where on a daily basis, you could just walk around and talk to people about the problem. And because at the end, the problem is linked to patients, you want to be in an environment that actually sees patients and interacts with patients, and possibly you want to involve patients themselves, as we often do, in terms of having the discussion about what could best benefit them.
That's why I feel like MD Anderson is doing an amazing job, because any employee you ask up here, they're going to say the same thing. They're most thankful for the teamwork. They have a very variety of team where everybody's doing their own job, but in one way or the other, they all interact together.
Very collaborative,
Final goal. Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. For this segment, I'll talk about the legacy of you at MD Anderson Cancer Center. You have played a very important role in shaping the scientific culture at the institution. And now, as you approach retirement after 14 years of leadership, what part of that cultural shift are you most proud of? And what do you hope the institution continues to build on in the years ahead?
I would say the most important thing for me is changing the conversation about MD Anderson from being recognized a top center for clinical care into being recognized as a top center for cancer research. I mean, of course, there has been a long legacy here of cancer research, but it was primarily oriented towards clinical trials. I was able to help towards creating an entire pipeline, if you want, of investigators that really go from PhDs working in laboratories, including, crystallographers, molecular biologists, mouse geneticists, and so on and so forth. And over the past 5 years, for example, we have been able to recruit 60 or so new researchers, laboratory researchers, either PhDs or MD PhDs, physician scientists that are working in this context. I think this is what we can see now as an element of strength. Again, the context of really facilitating as much as possible multidisciplinary approaches to problem solving. The other component, of course, is been about building our own capabilities in drug discovery. Small molecules, biologics, cell therapies, and so on. And this is an area where we're really, really strong today. This has also helped, fundraising, both from, government agencies as well as from industry and philanthropy. This is all helping MD Anderson to be, what it is today.
Amazing. What do you hope the institution leads towards? Is there something that you hope in the next 10 years becomes possible at MD Anderson? What would that be?
But clearly impact in areas that are still considered as intractable. We have a great strength here. We see many rare cancers, and even the rarest cancer is being seen at MD Anderson, and our numbers are sufficiently high for us to be able to invest in attempting to understand how to approach them. So we have, large collection, for example, patient databases, clinical samples that we can investigate in terms of identifying mutations that might be responsible for those cancers to be, thriving in the body, how would we target them, developing animal models of disease, and so on and so forth.
Amazing. And of course, leading a cancer center's research mission isn't only scientific. As we may know, it's emotional because lives depend on the outcomes. So for that, what was the most challenging part of carrying that responsibility, and what helped you navigate it during your time at MD Anderson?
For me, despite my own, of course, personal challenges with having to deal, most of the time, because people will come to people like me in situations in which they lost hope about their cancers, and I constantly refer patients here. But I think it's also sustaining the pressure that is there for junior investigators to be able to sustain their clinical load. At times, these people are surgeons, for example. Sustain their clinical load, sustain the research activity, make sure that they can get grants, and make sure that they still believe that this is all worthwhile. And there are ups and downs, of course, in research, because you could say 90% of the experiments don't necessarily go in the right direction, and so you're all waiting for that aha moment of what something is ultimately going to work. So how do you continue to sustain yourself if you have a family, and then you have the clinic, and then you have the lab, and that gets to be very, very pressing. So I think it's to me, the responsibility of managers is really to be in an academic environment, to be mentors in chief.
Love that.
Forget about the rest. Make sure that if we hire 50 people, that all 50 of them are successful, and not just count on Mendelian selection for success. People need support, and we want to make sure that we will stay on track towards success.
That is exactly what makes a great leader like yours.
Exactly.
So thank you for that. And finally, my question is, what advice would you give to someone who's just starting his journey or her journey in college and is just afraid of the long commitment, and they feel like they may not belong here? What would be something that you would want to give them to motivate and be inspired by?
I mean, I understand that often there are financial challenges, but outside of that, follow your passion. You're going to be working a long time. Today, I celebrate my 50th year in a laboratory.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So
Congrats.
if you don't like that job, don't do it.
Do it. Yep.
But, follow your passion, because ultimately you're going to be working. I have a son who's a physicist and another one who's a financial guru. But they really love what they do. I would not do either. Yeah. But you have to think about that in that terms, and it's impossible to do a job that is pushed on you by your family or anybody else.
I agree.
Yeah,
Very true. Yeah. Because a lot of kids nowadays do go through that, where coming from like a cultural family who wants you to pursue something, and
It's pushed on them.
Yeah, it's pushed on them, and I do feel like you're not going to be able to do your job really well if you're being forced into something. So if you're, like you said, only do it if you're passionate about it. Follow your
Do it
passion.
for yourself, pretty much. I think that's one of
right.
the main messages.
Amazing. So we'll move on to our last two questions, which were from our
Instagram audience. And one of the questions was, how is MD Anderson preparing for the future of personalized or AI-driven medicine?
Again, it's the reason why I feel super comfortable about this is because in recruitment of young talent and then them recruiting trainees in their laboratories and so on, we're driving a transformation around quantitative science, computational AI that could not be possible if we had been left just people like me who weren't exposed to this.
Yeah.
So I see that even if MD Anderson may not have a comprehensive strategy around the utilization of AI in every single domain of what we do, from patient encounters to pharmacy to MRIs and all sorts of other things, at the level of junior investigators and their trainees, there's lots of things going. There is lots of stuff brewing that is going to bring innovation.
And the second question I had was, how is MD Anderson ensuring that the advancements in personalized cancer medicine are accessible to underserved communities?
Well, we have several initiatives in place. Of course, we're connected as being an NIH and CI-funded comprehensive cancer center. We have certain obligations of really coordinating our activities with other cancer centers in the nation. We have a statewide initiative for community outreach and engagement. So we have a community advisory council. We have initiatives in 4 areas in the states that go deeper. So, but this is an important point, because one way, we always say help people to a greater degree and help more people. I mean, we can possibly reach out to every single person in the planet. So, our educational efforts are really targeted at making sure that whatever we learn is disseminated in terms of knowledge, protocols, approaches. And of course, our presence at a conference is also aimed at doing that. Make sure that people know that something was discovered here, something was learned. Even learning from our mistakes is something that can help.
And this brings us to the end, Dr. Draetta. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And as you approach retirement, we hope you take pride in knowing how many lives you have shaped from the work that you did. And your work's impact will continue long beyond the lab itself. So
again, thank you so much. And thank you for coming on. And thank you so much to MD Anderson Cancer Center for allowing us to film their campus. And if you guys love this podcast or give you something to think about, share it and keep dreaming. And we'll see you guys next time on the Dreamers Podcast.
See you next time.